In this video, we're going to focus on learning strategies that will help us to add different signed integers. So if you look at the screen, you're going to notice that we have 5 different problems that contain signed numbers being added. So in part A, we have 2 positives. In part B, we have 1 of each. Part C, 2 negatives. Part D, 1 of each. And part E, 1 of each. And if you're a strong adder, then this video will just be a really good review for you. But if you struggle with adding these signed numbers and getting the correct answer, this video is going to offer you some strategies that are going to help you when it comes to adding these signed numbers. So the first strategy that I typically recommend to students is just to utilize a number line. And while that might seem a little bit elementary, it actually makes the process of adding integers incredibly visual. So what I tell students to do is start with the first number and go to that location on a number line. So for example, say you're not good with adding, and here we have 5 plus 9. So I'm going to go to 5 on my number line and put a little dot. And then I'm adding 9, which means that number is going to get more positive. It's going to get bigger. So I'm going to take my dot and I'm going to move it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. And when I move it 9 times, I end up at 14. So right there on the number line, we can visually see that if we start at 5 and we add 9 to it in the positive direction, we end up with 14. Now, if we move on to the second one here, we notice that we have 4 plus negative 2. And again, we're going to start with that same process. We're going to go to the first number on the number line, so 4. And then it says plus negative 2. Because this is a negative 2, it tells us that we're moving in the negative or smaller direction. So we're going to move towards the numbers that are more negative. So we're going to move 2 slots, 1, 2. So here when we do 4 plus negative 2, it's a positive 2 because that's where we ended up on the number line when we modeled it using the number line. All right, if we look at the next one, we have negative 7, so we're starting here. And we're going to move 10 in the negative direction. So we're going to move to the left because those are towards the more negative numbers. So we move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We end up right here at negative 17. Then again, if we look at this fourth example here, we have 6 plus a negative 12, so I'm going to go to 6 here on my number line. And then because this is a negative 12, I'm going to move towards the negative numbers. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And we end up here at negative 6. So to me, what's interesting about this one is we started at a positive number, but because we added a bigger negative number to it, our solution ended up being negative. So we actually switched the sign as we added those two numbers together. And last but not least, we have negative 3 plus 8. So we're going to go to negative 3 on our number line. And then because we have a positive 8, we're going to move towards the positive numbers to the right. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we end up here at 5. So notice here, again, we have a situation where we started at a negative number, but then because of the number we added to it, we ended up with a number that is the opposite sign of positive. So in addition to the number line, we also have 2 addition rules that help us when we're adding numbers together, especially if we don't have a number line handy. So here you'll see addition rule number 1. It says when adding 2 or more integers with the same sign. So what that means is that the 2 integers you're adding are either both positive, like we see here in this first example, or both negative, like you see here in the second example. So we're adding 2 numbers that contain the same sign. And when we're adding 2 or more integers with the same sign, we simply add the 2 numbers together and keep the sign. So, for example, in this first one, we have 12 plus 5. So if you don't have a number line handy, you could say 12 added with 5, and you can even count on your fingers if you need to. But 12 added with 5 is 17. So we add those two numbers together, and because they're both positive numbers, our result ends up being positive. So 12 plus 5 is equal to a positive 17. Now, if we look at the second example here, we have two negative numbers being added. So what that's telling us is that because we have two numbers that are negative being added, we're going to have a negative result. So what we do here is we focus on the 7 and the 4 and we add them together. 7 plus 4 is 11. And because they are both negative numbers, our result is going to be a negative 11. So when you're adding two numbers with the same sign, if you do not have a number line handy, you can just add the two numbers together and not worry about the sign at first. And then when you have your final answer, after adding those two numbers together, you tack the sign of both numbers back on. So addition rule number 2 now focuses on when we're adding two or more integers with different signs. So what you're going to notice here is that in each example, we have numbers with different signs. One of them is negative and one of them is positive. So they're different signs, and as a result, the adding process is a little bit different. So when you're adding two or more numbers with different signs, you basically look at the two numbers and you subtract the smaller number from the bigger number. And then what you're going to do once you've subtracted, so for example here we have 12 and 5, so we would take 12 minus 5, and that's 7. So after you subtract the two numbers, you then take the sign of the bigger number. So for example here, we took 12 minus 5, which was 7. Because the 12 is a negative number, this becomes a negative 7. So negative 12 plus 5 would become a negative 7. Now if we look here at example 2, we see 7 plus negative 4. So we subtract, so 7 minus 4 is 3. And because the 7 is a positive number, our result becomes a positive 3. So notice the slight differences here. If we have the same sign, we add them together and keep the sign of both numbers. And if we have two numbers being added with different signs, we subtract them and keep the sign of the bigger number. Now, if you don't like these rules, you always have the option to use a number line instead. So if these rules are a little bit confusing to you or you struggle with them, I would focus on drawing out a number line and counting instead and really visually seeing that addition process take place. So now that we've mastered the process of adding two integers that are signed together, we're now going to look at how we add more than two integers together. So you can see that in the problems below, we have more than two integers together. So you can see here we have a little starting sentence, and it says when adding two or more integers together, we add them together from left to right. So just as if you were to read a book, that's how you add numbers together. So what I like to do is I like to do it in chunks and actually add two numbers at a time from left to right until I've added them all together. So for example, in this first problem here, we have negative 6 plus 3 plus negative 7. So we're going to underline the first two numbers that we're adding together. We're going to add them together from left to right. And here you can either utilize your addition rules or you can utilize your number line. But the first thing we do is we take negative 6 plus 3. And if we use one of the strategies that we learned before, we realize that negative 6 plus 3 is a negative 3. So I've now added those two numbers together, and I'm left with negative 3 plus 7. So now I move on from here and I add these two numbers together because they're the next two. So from here, I take negative 3 plus negative 7. I utilize one of my adding strategies to add them together and find that they equal negative 10. So all three of these numbers added together equal negative 10. Now if we apply the same process down here in part B, We're just going to go two numbers at a time from left to right until we've added them all together. So we start with negative 3 plus 6. If I utilize one of my strategies, I find negative 3 plus 6 is 3. I then move on to the next two numbers, so I now have the 3 plus my next number is negative 9. So I add those two numbers together to get negative 6. And then I move on to this next number here, negative 6 plus negative 4. Those added together is negative 10. And then negative 10 plus 20, those two numbers added together give me 10. So when I go through and just add one at a time from left to right, I end up with a final result of 10. So last but not least, we're going to look at how addition is utilized in word problems. So if we read through this together, it says the temperature at 5 a.m. is 68 degrees Fahrenheit. During the day, the temperature rises 15 degrees Fahrenheit and then drops 12 degrees Fahrenheit. What is the temperature after these changes? So what I notice here is I start with 68 degrees, and then when the temperature rises, I add 15 degrees to it, and when the temperature drops, I'm adding a negative 12 degrees to it because I'm going down in degrees. So all I need to do here to solve this problem is to add from left to right. So here we have 68 degrees plus 15 degrees. Well, that one might not be easy to do with a number line because I don't have a number line that big, but this is really saying 68, and then I can break the 15 up into 10 and to 5. So 68 plus 10 is 78, and 78 plus 5 gives me, so 78 plus 5 is 79, 80, 81, 82, and 83. So here I'm at 83 degrees, and then I'm going to add in this negative 12 because the temperature drops. And again, here I'm looking, okay, negative 12 is going to drop it a full 10, which drops me to 73 degrees, and then 2 more, which drops me to 71 degrees Fahrenheit. So after all of those changes, I went from 68 up to 83 and then back down to 71.